Welcome to my den. This is where I do the editing and the voiceovers, etc. for these videos I make. Someone contacted me and said they weren't too keen on all the background music I use. So this time I'm going to cut out the background music and try and do a bit more voiceover, a few more explanations of what's actually going on. Let me know what you think about it. Drop me a comment and don't forget to like and subscribe. I've got a little bit more to do and I'm hoping I'll get this out this evening. It's Friday, and if you're watching this, then of course I got it finished. So let's get stuck in. The top is looking pretty good. It's now time. I've got to clean up these oblong holes, and I've been thinking a bit about how to do it. I started by drilling 2 1/4-inch round holes and then just connect them together with a chisel, but they're still a bit rough around the edges. So what I want to do is I found a 1/4-inch, it's not a flush trim bit, but it's something I can use as a flush trim bit. What I want to do is make a little jig so I can put this in there, and the jig I need, I started with a 1/4-inch, but I need to have the shank of the router bit needs to be up against here, and in order to get enough of the shank there to make sure it's sliding nicely down in the square hole I'm going to make in this isn't thick enough yet, so I'm going to start using a 1/2-inch piece, which gives me a really nice gives me room to play with. So I've got to cut a piece of this, and I've got to put a 1/2-inch by a 1/4-inch hole, and then a 1/2-inch by 3/4-inch hole for these, the square holes basically. So I'm going to use this and make my own tools basically. So that's what I'm doing now. I'm quickly marking up where I need to drill and make the square hole, which I'm going to use as the template for this 1/4-inch bit, which I'm going to use to clean up the holes. I'll make that the same way as I did the original holes in the top. A couple of 1/4-inch round holes and then a chisel to tidy up the corners and edges. If I get this one correct, then all the holes should be correct. That's going to take a bit of a while to do the holes, so I won't bore you with the details. I'll hop over it and move on to something a bit more interesting. It's just showing you how I clamp them in place, lining them up, making sure they're square with the overall instrument. A couple of clamps, square it off, and we're good to go. I'm going to completely finish everything, so I need to take off the old shellac. I assume it's shellac. It's very, very easy to take off, and I'll use a new coating of shellac to protect the wood more than anything else. It is old, it's very dusty and brittle. I really want to protect it as much as I can. This is the panel at the back of the Windchest. I'm giving that a quick once over. You'll see I'm standing over the original serial number. I'm going to leave enough just so that I can see it through the shellac that I'm going to put on, and then I'll use try and get a sign writer to finish that up for me. Now, as I sanded the bottom panel, all the old saw marks from when it was originally built 100 years ago come through. So they didn't go to a lot of trouble to make it perfect, but no one's ever going to see that, so it just doesn't matter. This leather I'm going to use to glue the pallets onto. The pallets will be trimmed round afterwards. They're a little bit long because the end has to be used as a hinge, and that will glue onto the bar the piece of wood that goes up through the middle of the Windchest, as you can see it there. I had to cut 41 pieces. It's quite simple, really. You just saw me cutting these strips. These are the leather strips which I'm going to mount these little jobbies on, and then I'll trim around afterwards. These then go in here. You'll see that. And then there are pins that we have to put in between each of these pallets, I think they're called, so that they don't wiggle from side to side and they're straight up and down. Right, let's get stuck in. Now, I don't know what they used to glue these together originally. I'm using hot hide glue. I've got it there ready to go. I may as well use it. Don't know if these will ever be rebuilt or refinished again. It's if it lasts 100 years, as long as it's already lasted, then I'm not sure anyone's going to want to do this again. But in case they do, I'm using the hide glue. You'll see I'm just using tins, little ice cream containers. I've shown this before. I use them, fill them with water, and then I can use them as weights to hold things in place. As I said, there's 41 of these, so I will cut through it quickly. And as I take them out of my container and glue them onto the leather, I'm going to lay them out in the correct order, so I've got them ready for when I need to put them inside the Windchest. Now, it does take quite a bit of time. All these little steps, they're fiddly, they're time consuming, and it's a lot more work than I thought. I sometimes regret taking on this this restoration. It really was a little bit outside my comfort zone in terms of my skills and my the tools and everything I have here, but it was going to go in a dumpster otherwise, I think, and I got it for a very reasonable price, just a few $100. The shipping cost more than the actual organ, but the gentleman I got it from was very nice, and he packed it all up for me and shipped it off to me. So now I really don't have much choice. Part of my legacy when I depart this planet in a few years, I'll have these two left behind, my replica and this restoration. And hopefully people will appreciate it in years to come. Not too many left to go now. I think this took me most of a morning. The videos I make are between 10 and 30 minutes long, but it can take 2 or 3 weeks to get the actual work done, which I'm filming. There's an awful lot cut out. And every time I go out to the garage to do some work, I have to set up. It takes me 30, 40 minutes to set up the garage and get the cables laid out, the electrical power supply, and wheel everything out, get the car out. Now, these are the pins that go in. They go in between each of the pallets, and that's so they don't go from side to side and interfere with each other, and that they will always come back to the original position. Now ready just to trim the excess leather off of the pallets. I suppose I could have cut them to shape and size right from the get-go, but I'm not sure how that would have worked. This way I can also take off any squeeze out from the hide glue. I'm quite adept at using a scalpel. When I was 15, I left school and started an apprenticeship in a newspaper, as a compositor, and we were making newspaper pages back in the 60s, early 70s, still using lead characters. The headlines, we pulled out big typefaces, just like Gutenberg used to 400 or 500 years ago, and we'd set the headlines for the newspaper in hot metal type. Well, just as I came to the end of my apprenticeship, of course, that all went by the board. Spent 5 years learning to do it, and then it all got wiped out in an instant with desktop publishing. And part of desktop publishing is you use a scalpel and a blade for what was called paste up. I'm ready to glue in the pallets that open and close the wind channels. Now I've got to trim this leather to the correct length so that it has plenty to hold it down but doesn't stick out too far, because I also have to put a big sheet of leather or something in there which will overlap it to also hold it in to make this airtight. So that's the next thing. I've got to cut the leather at the top, and I've got to trim it off. So I was just quickly measuring up to make sure I put them to the right length. You'll see the piece of wood that goes down where I put the ruler laid across it now. I'm making a mark because I want to glue the leather onto that. I'm going to size it with some hot glue before I stick them in. That little piece of wood there, that's just a spacer so that I get the blue carbon tape parallel. Nice, not too much, just enough to give me something that it will all stick to. I will come back afterwards and use heat and pressure to fix it properly. But this is where you'll see that a little bit of glue on the leather, and then I can push it down onto the sized area I just made, and that will give it a really good grip. Very careful to make sure they all line up exactly, and that they will cover the hole underneath so that it'll give a nice airtight seal. Now I'm using this block of steel. It wasn't very successful. I couldn't get it to balance. And once I got it to balance, I just knocked the table and it would go over again. So I don't have a proper workbench. I'm just using a cheap table from Costco, I think it was. I'll have to get round to making myself a table at some point. A nice carpenter's workbench. I've got one in the corner, but I can't get it out. There's too much crap in the way. Now I've left a little bit of that wooden bar that goes up, right up through the center of the Windchest, because I'm going to glue another piece to that. Something I found out here, using parchment paper so that I can use a little iron, to fuse the glue and melt it and get it to fuse from the leather down onto the sizing I used. But I found out that you cannot stick blue carpenter's tape onto parchment paper. It just doesn't stick. It's waxed paper, so I guess I should have known that. This little iron is not terribly good. It's got rounded edges. It would have been nicer if it had a flat edge. Well, now I've got to glue in a piece of leather that completely covers over all of these channels and makes it airtight. So what I'm doing is I'm doing it a little bit at a time. I'm butting this leather up to the leather on the pallets. I'm not overlapping, I'm butting it up. And then you'll see later how I will then cover both edges up with a nice strip. That means that there's no gaps. If I was to lay one piece of leather up on top of another one, there would be a little bit of a gap where they join, and that wouldn't have been good. So this way I'm just being as careful as I can. Now that I've got that in place, I'm using a hot air gun to just remelt the glue and make sure that it's really well fixed. There you can see how it butts up to the other piece of leather. So I've got the leather in there. Doesn't quite match here. What I've got to do now is I'm going to put in a strip of leather covering what are in effect the hinges for these. That'll make them stronger. It'll also guarantee there's no leaks in these pieces. And then 2 pieces on the end to cover the gap there. And then that's that leather finished. In order to glue this strip of leather in the correct place and make sure I don't get a lot of glue or in the wrong places I don't want it to, I'm just putting a bit of carpet tape down again, defining the area where I want to lay the strip of leather, and then a quick layer of hot hide glue, and I'll be ready to lay the piece of leather in there. Because the leather on the pallets and the leather which I used to cover the Windchest panels were flat, they were butted up to each other, this will just lay flat across it, no real problems. Give me a nice seal. These pieces are to make sure that the far edges are sealed as well. And there we have it. The leather is all in place. The pallets are all in place. These springs are to make sure that the pallets are under tension to be pushed and made airtight. Now, individually, they're not terribly strong, but collectively they do get quite strong, and they do bend up these bars when they're in there. You'll see that in a little bit. This is quite a fiddly job. Wasn't sure how to do them, whether to put the bars in first and then add the springs. I'm going to try and do the springs. I'm using a bit of blue carpenter's tape to hold them in place. Not terribly successful, but you'll see what I'm doing here. As I turn this over now and get the springs, they don't line up. They're all fiddly and they wiggle around a lot. But you'll see as I work through this that I've got them in a place where I can put them one at a time into the slots on top of the pallets. It was a bit of a mistake. Some of them went down the sides of the pallets and got caught underneath them. Do you see how strong that is? That was really quite surprising. Anyway, I'm going to use the original nails and I'm putting them back into place. And now I'm just adjusting the final ones that I need to get into the slots on top of the pallets. Very fiddly work. It was during this this fiddly work that I realised it would have been much easier for me to put the bars in and then add the springs one at a time. Although it didn't take too long, so I guess it's 6 of one, half a dozen of the other, as they say. There were a couple that kind of went down the side and underneath the pallet, and I had to really work hard. I almost thought about taking it all out again and starting from scratch, but I didn't. I got it there in the end. This is how I put one in from scratch, easy, just pop it in there, easy. I could have done more like that. It's time to do a little bit of finishing. I'm going to wipe these all down with a tack cloth. They've already been sanded ready. And then I'll finish them with a coating of shellac. I mentioned before how this was quite a rough piece of timber. They hadn't finished it really nicely, but it was adequate. Things aren't seen, so it doesn't really matter. I don't know why I was using a brush here. On the next piece, I'll use the roller, a little bit quicker. No biggie. That hole, I'm just shellacking the edges. It's where the air comes from the bellows up into the Windchest. There's a couple of things I need to make for that. There's what's called a coupler that connects to the bellows and then comes up and connects to the Windchest. Strange enough, it doesn't look too good there. But in real life, the finish looks a lot better than it does on camera. This is where I'm using the roller. Should have done that the first time. I'm now going to use a roller to shellac the edges of the Windchest. And the reason I'm putting the masking tape on there is because I don't want any shellac to come up and get on the top. The top is the piece that will probably be seen the most, and so that's the one that it's important to try and get a really good finish on it. And then I've finished shellacking the edges, and now I'm taking the tape off. See, there's a little bit that bled under, but that's not a big deal. And as I said, the finish actually looks a lot better in real life than it does on the camera. And I will be giving it another layer, another coating, when I come to finally finish and assembling everything. It's amazing how quickly you can do something this large when you've got a roller. I have used a spray gun, but I'm not very good at spraying, so I'm a bit more comfortable with this. Now I have to put a leather packing gasket on the panel at the back and the bottom panel, and I'm not going to glue it on with hide glue. I'm just using it because it's a gasket. So what I'm doing is I'm just using some little bit of spray glue just to tack it on there, so it just holds it. I could just put a strip round the edges here, but I want to, I don't want any gaps in the corners where you butt bits of leather up to each other. So I'm using a whole piece from a large skin I got. This is thick packing leather. I think it might be a little overkill, but I do have it, and I thought, well, I want to make it as best as I possibly can. So the cost isn't really the problem. It's trying to do something that will last a long time and do a good job. And it's very easy just to trim around the edges. I've got a few offcuts I can use for something else where I need small pieces. The old scalpel is doing sterling service. They used to be really expensive, and I didn't know where I was going to get them, but they're available on Amazon, and the blades are cheap as anything, so that really worked out well. I'm going to fit the what is in fact the bottom and the edge onto this now. The inside's looking pretty good, and then that's as far as I'll go today, is putting these two on and then making sure everything fits. It'll all come off again a bit later when I'll do some tinkering and so on. I'm not sure if I'm going to have to get a hole punch and punch a little bit more out around where the screws go through to prevent the leather from bunching up and stopping it from fitting properly. But the dry fit went well. I'm using all new hardware. The hardware that came with it was very mix and match over the years. They lost some and used different screws. I'm using Torx screws. Now they're steel, so they won't rust. And I'm using little cut washers for this part, and I'm using other washers. I don't know what they're called. They're the ones that are raised up. The cut ones go down, the raised ones come up. I'm not sure what different names are. But that's because every screw I took out was damaged in some way, the slot screws. And the Phillips screws, you know, I don't particularly like them. These Torx are wonderful, and I have no problem with my conscience using modern Torx on this if it improves it and makes it easier to take apart and put back together again. So there we go. I'm going to get stuck in with this. You'll see I'm using a drill to put them in. That's because there's so many screws and my wrists hurt when I use an ordinary screwdriver. But I do have it on a very low torque so that it doesn't run the risk of going in too deep or tearing out the threads. It's very satisfying to see this coming together now. And as I've said several times, the finish looks much better in real life. Well, that went on rather easily. Remember, I'm using exactly the same holes that have been in there for 100 years. I haven't drilled any new holes. I'm using the same pieces of wood, and the only thing that's really new is the top, and there's nothing that screws into that. One thing I have noticed is that this is not pulling in completely tightly here. That's because if I try to tighten it anymore, it's going to start spinning. So I've been using 3/4 inch screws. I wanted to try with 3/4. I don't want to split the wood or anything. I don't necessarily want to drill anymore, but the holes are a little bigger than they need to be for this. So I'm going to change these for 1-inch screws when I come to completely install it. A few bits and pieces to do. I'm just going to do these push rods. That's a simple matter. So I'm really quite pleased. Underneath these flat cupped washers, because I'm using the cupped washers here, they go in a little bit further than the ones on here which are using the raised washers. And I will use, I'm not sure what to do. I've got a 4055. I've got to get a sign writer or somebody just to touch that up, make that nice again. But this is going to look really nice. It's working. I'm very pleased with that. So that's me for this week. Sadly, I'm going away for a week, so I'm not going to do any work. I wake up in the morning feeling a little bit anxious about what work do I have to do, can I get a video out by the end of the week. Next week I'm not going to worry, I'm going to go to Monterey and go cycling, walking on the beach with my dog, just generally having a bit of a break. A little bit crazy cakes here in the US at the moment, keeps me awake at night, so I'm going to use this as my therapy. Well, thanks for watching, see you all next time I put out a video. Like and subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Cheers.